Welcome to episode 5 of Leadership Unplugged. I spoke to Head of Strategy and Operations at Future VC Anishka Prasad back in the summer. Anishka is an individual very much embedded within the London VC ecosystem, with a passion for helping founders solve big problems and make a real impact in the world. Having been an immigrant for the majority of her life, she has seen firsthand the power of entrepreneurship to create opportunity for people from all backgrounds. In this episode, I talked to Anishka about her journey, the challenges she's faced, and some of the insights and lessons she has learned along the way. So, if you're interested in learning more about the VC world, or even if you're an aspiring founder looking for inspiration, then this is the podcast for you. So, Anishka, thank you very much for coming in to see us and being on the podcast. We've got a lot to dive into, so I'm just going to get straight into it. So my first question to you would be, in order to understand who Anishka is, what do the audience need to know about you?
Thank you very much, Hasan, for having me on. It's a great honor to be on your podcast, and thanks a lot for inviting me. I guess in terms of starting off with your question of who get to know Anishka and etc. I've always been passionate about businesses, and I've always been passionate about people growing things from the ground up, and that's been something that was sort of like a seed. Even in my legal career, I was launching a few startups here and there and helping people out with their businesses until I came to London. It became a full-fledged thing, launching a startup of my own and then going into VC and helping out companies, etc. So I think at the very seed of things, I'm very interested in helping out with early stage venture.
So I guess what was it about early stage venture which kind of attracted you? Is it something which has been instilled in you in a young age, or is that idea of problem solving maybe? Some people kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I suppose problem solving is one way to look at it. From my personal background, I mean, I've been an immigrant in every country that I've lived in. So startup culture and hustle is just, I suppose it's part of your story, and the way you see your parents, for instance, try and adapt to a new country and make things work. There's a lot of problem solving there when it comes to just making life work. So I suppose for me, what excites me the most is how people come from completely different, backgrounds and jurisdictions and whatnot and make something out of themselves. And really, I think that's what impresses me the most in terms of the impact that they leave on people and how they develop themselves and their leadership skills. And that's what really excites me about early stage venture, is because there's so much more than the numbers. It's all about the founder. It's all about the passion and like basically their why is the company. The company is them. And that's what sort of inspires me to work with people who are at that stage.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm going to kind of take a deep dive into your childhood a little bit. So I guess, do you want to tell people where you grew up? And I think the main question I have for you is, in your family, what kind of values were instilled in you at a very young age? And, which one do you hold like closest to your heart when it comes to, growing up and moving countries, etc.?
Yeah, great question. So I was born in Fiji, which is a very different world compared to where I currently live in London. It's got its own unique point. Opportunities are few and far between. So I suppose right from the get-go, a huge part of my upbringing had been education and discipline, and a lot of that was to create your own opportunities, because I saw my parents do it, right? Like coming from a smaller country basically means that you've got that mindset. You're not going to be given a ton of opportunities, so you have to find it, you have to create it, and that just generally came from like every single stage in life, I suppose, like going to kindy and like primary school, etc. in Fiji, and then afterwards we sort of migrated to New Zealand, so my high schooling, etc. was over there, very much still in the immigrant mindset, right? Because New Zealand is a bit more developed, etc., but like it was very much in the sort of core values of my family that wherever we go, we will have to create that opportunity. It's not going to come knocking at your door. It's about building an ecosystem from scratch. So that builder mentality and mindset in terms of like liking, working with founders at an early stage came from that very beginning of my world, right? So I've seen my parents, for instance, create things from scratch. I've seen my parents sort of like build a new life once or twice at a time. And that just kind of is a natural way of being for me, I suppose, that, this is exactly how it should be. Even having like worked in, different jobs, etc., the entrepreneurial spirit is always there in terms of being able to do something and contribute back.
Interesting. So I guess it seems like from a very early age, kind of self-made, kind of nothing gets handed down to you. You kind of have to make it yourself kind
Absolutely.
of attitude. So I guess what's interesting for me, having done a bit of like digging on your LinkedIn and stuff, you went to go and study law. Now, to a lot of people, law wouldn't necessarily be conducive of entrepreneurial thinking. So, kind of what attracted you to go and study law and kind of practice law later on?
I suppose when you start off in life, you're kind of thinking about what areas in life sort of like generate income, right? And quite frankly, what's a solid base? What's a foundation? And what is kind of like something that's a fallback plan, etc. Like most people start off like that. I think you have very many hobbies, but you want to be able to have something that, if all else fails, this is one core skill that you can double down on, right? So for me personally, growing up as a teenager, I was very good at languages and I was good at sort of like writing essays and things like that. So it was a natural gravitation towards, and my parents would like to say I was very good at arguing. So, and I used that to my strength, and I just became a litigator to begin with because it was just a natural aptitude to sort of like go and start. And there wasn't very much like grooming, etc., that went into that, right? Like,
Yeah.
whereas with other professions, I suppose there might be like way more. And quite frankly, economic opportunity at the time. So going in to do law degree at the time that I did was very in vogue, right? Most people were sort of like, oh, I'm doing law and something else, like law and commerce, law and arts, law and this. So I did just that, right? It was one of those things that you start off with. But the intention was always to like keep going. So when the opportunity to do an MBA arose, I leapt it up with both hands and legs, and I jumped on a plane and I came to the UK. And I took that opportunity in my stride to just see where the world takes me. So it was by all means like a starting point for me to embark on a legal career. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities that came my way because it really honed in my skills in terms of being able to speak to you right now, for instance, just being able to hold your own, researching skills, being able to negotiate deals, being able to understand what a deal is, both parties, etc. All of those hardcore skills, I'm very, very grateful for my legal career for. The rest of which, baptism by fire, the startup did for me. I basically learned as I went, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you touched on a couple of things which I want to try and dissect a bit further. This idea of kind of core skills, income versus dreams. This is a question we've asked a couple of our guests, and I want to get your opinion on it as well, as to whether or not, in today's day and age, do you think, especially for people that are either graduated or very early stages in their career, do you think it's better for them to be a jack of all trades or be a master at one thing?
That's a very difficult question. I think it really depends on the person and their level of skill, right? Because I'll give you an example. The way that I see this is amongst athletes, for instance, right? Would you make an athlete do a full-on law degree, etc., and like push them towards one, or would you like sort of encourage them to go down the athletic field there and potentially become an Olympian, right? Like they maybe have legs for that, but then you have to ask yourself to what degree is your skill already there, and for you to be able to hone it, like basically what's the time horizon on this, right? I definitely am somebody who has contingency plans, so I fall back on things. I'm somebody who definitely would like to like keep honing on some natural skills that I have, but also have a few other skills in my back pocket that I can fall onto. So for me personally, it was law, where I knew for a fact that I can understand a contract, I can pick up legal work, I can understand how the world works in that way. But doing, like, for instance, launching a business was completely alien for me, right? So it was definitely a very jack of all trades type situation. So my answer to that is really, it's a balancing act. Understand that it's not something that you can answer in a one question sort of scenario, right? It's very much, what are the opportunities in your life at that point in time? Is there a hardcore signal that your skill is going to be lucrative at some point? Is there something that, that's basically pushing you in that direction that for a fact that, if you did X, Y, and Z, you will find success? If the answer is no, it doesn't mean ditch your dream. It means definitely have a contingency or a fallback in which you can basically rely on and keep on honing that skill at some point to see what the potential is to be realized. Because if you just jumped into something that's a potential of a skill, and let's say you didn't really meet any success, that's what demotivates people, right? That's what demotivates people, and then basically makes them think, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at anything, because you don't really have a fallback plan. So I think with most people who are especially like younger, starting off their career, etc., have something to fall back on for sure, right? In terms of like an education, a skill set, or, a vocation that for a fact that you can naturally do. And if you've got a skill that needs a little bit of honing in, a bit of like, brushing up, etc., keep that going to realize its potential.
No, I mean that's a very fair point to make. I think it's definitely something that I've kind of grappled with personally. I know a lot of people, a lot of friends have also kind of grappled with it as well. I also want to kind of touch base on your time in New Zealand. For a lot of people, when they go to university or college, it's usually the first time they've left home, and there's a big learning curve there. For you, how was your experience at college, and kind of when you look back at that time, what do you think is the one skill that you learned which you kind of use today?
I think it was very interesting because like one of my degrees was from Auckland, which is my parents were there, so I stayed home. And the other degree, I decided to go to a different city and do it. And I'm so grateful for that experience because if it wasn't for that very experience, I would not have realized that I can do things on my own. It's, the first time that you're out there and you're trying to basically make life work for yourself. So basically, you're trying to manage your finances. And had it not been for that initial experience, I would not have taken a bigger leap to sort of switch an entire continent and come over to London, right? Because when I arrived in London, I didn't know a single soul. I literally knew about 3 people when I got off the plane, and one of them was my recruiter, another one was a landlord, and another person was just literally somebody that I met during MBA. And I didn't have anyone else on my address list to like sort of call on, etc. So this entire network that I built just came from, just constantly hustling and networking and going to events and meeting people. So, but I think I would not have been able to execute this had I not taken that early leap of going to university in a different city, trying that out on my own, just being open to experiences, to opportunities, just trying to understand that, you can learn something from everyone. Whether you give them 5 minutes of your time or 5 hours, there's something to be learned over there. So I think it just really opened my world when I moved. So I highly recommend that people leave. People leave their comfort zone and go and explore things because it really does add layers to you in so many areas of life. Personal, emotional, career-wise, financial, for sure. Like, you learn how to budget. You learn how to, like, make the most of your money. You learn how to invest. I don't think I would have been able to do any one of the things that I've done today had I not made that move then. And, I mean, quite frankly, I think most people just, like, are scared of adulthood, right? They just don't want to take the leap because they kind of like the idea of, like, staying with their parents. And, like, I'm not judging them, not saying it's bad or anything, but the sooner you kind of like ditch your comfort zone, even for a short period of time, at least you understand what your personal ability is to sort of morph into the person that you want to be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned a couple of times you move into London to study your MBA, so we'll kind of come to that in a bit. Before that, I wanted to ask a quick question as to there's usually quite a stigma around people in the UK have tough upper lip or quite hard to speak to. From your experience in New Zealand, kind of what characteristics do Kiwis have which everyone should be adopting, do you think?
I think people in London should smile a bit more, for sure. I think I definitely was considered quite a lunatic when I first came here, and I was smiling at people in like tube rides, etc. And I stopped doing that after 6 months because I realized that wasn't something that was trending in London, and I picked up on the signals, etc. But I do think that there's a lot going on in this city, so like I don't blame them. Now that I've lived here for this long, I understand that the average Londoner is going through quite a few things and just not talking about how busy they are. The culture is not to talk about, oh God, I'm so busy. It's just get on with it, which I really appreciate. And I've always been that person, I think, my entire life, because I've just never kind of said, oh, I'm so busy, like, I can't do this. I'd rather be doing 5 million things at once and just be busy and not say, that to me is normal, right? That always was normal to me. And when I understood that that's what English culture is all about, I kind of embraced it. I was like, you know what? This is amazing. People don't have time to talk about what they're working on because there's so much going on at the time. Like you just have to be a bit more understanding of the fact that maybe they didn't smile, but they didn't mean any malice or harm. They just wanted to get on with their life and letting you get on with yours. So that's something that I've learned to truly appreciate about British culture, is that what you see is what you get, and it's very straightforward, as opposed to like, I'm going to smile at you a million times and like, take you out for a coffee, but then like I'm going to waste your time because I can't really help you in this respect.
I mean, it doesn't hurt to smile more, so I think...
A little bit, not too much, basically. The how much I was smiling when I first came here was just unaccounted for. It wasn't necessary.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's really... It's always interesting to kind of... obviously, because you grew up in a completely different culture to what we're living in right now, it's always interesting to hear kind of what you can take from different cultures and bring to your own self. So yeah, okay. So you moved to London to study your MBA. Quite a big transition, as in like packing up everything. And like you said, you came here only knowing three contacts, two of them, being your recruiter and your landlord. What did you learn about yourself during that period? Kind of what shocked you?
I guess my initial shock was because I'd always prided myself on being very independent, even in New Zealand, right? Like I'd lived alone for a bit, and like I'd flatted before and I knew how it works, etc. I was very, very proud of the fact that I can go anywhere and make that happen. But when it actually came to making it happen, the first initial 6 months was sort of a shake to the system, right? Like, because you're literally in this continent alone now, like you don't know anyone. And the timing that I picked was perfect as well, because COVID happened after 8 months, didn't it?
Oh no.
So there wasn't very much opportunity to go out there and connect with people as such, other than the MBA class, which was, by the way, online because of COVID.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of those things put into play. I guess I learned a lot about the fact that, yes, I set myself a very ambitious goal of coming and doing an MBA, launching a startup, as well as building an entire network from scratch. Was it scary? Yeah, very. Because at times, like, you'd literally be sitting by yourself and thinking, what the hell have I done? Like, where am I even going with this? Like, those things are, by the way, very normal. Mm-hmm. And it first came to realize that when I started, like, chatting with other founders on the similar journey as me, because there's an awful lot of immigrant founders in London, right? So there's no shortage of it. If you go to one of those meetups, you'll find 5 at least that kind of understand and have the same problems. So when that happened, I guess I understood there's a bit of normalcy over there. And I started patting myself on the back, that saying, what I've done is probably something that most people would shy away from and wouldn't do, because it is breaking out of your comfort zone. It is very uncomfortable. It's not convenient at all. And yeah, I mean, the worst part would have been, like, for instance, at times you'd want to have a chat with somebody, especially in the initial days of coming to London, where I don't know anyone in London. So I want to have chats with my, for instance, family, but they're in a different time zone. So, by the time they're up, you're sleeping. It's like literally a 12-hour difference, right? So I think what I learned was how to manage my emotions in that period, how to manage and prioritize my emotions. Like, what is an actual problem and what is just a fad in my brain? Like, because there's moments where you'll get that, right? Like, oh, I can't talk to anyone. I've got this massive problem with the startup. This is happening. My world's collapsing. No, your world isn't actually collapsing right now. It's just a fad. Work through the problems. I became a better problem solver through that process.
Interesting. Is there anything kind of... I'm trying to think, because there's going to be a lot of people who are listening to this who are either kind of... they want to try something entrepreneurial or go into the startup world. And that the idea of problem solving is quite key and important to being a startup founder. Is there kind of anything tangible that you do which, for example, some people might just write a to-do list every day, which helps them kind of plan their day and solve that problem? Is there anything that you do that which is quite tangible and people can take that kind of helped you with your problem solving journey?
I did make a lot of lists of things that I need to do, and then I basically made like a sort of priority horizon, what needs to be tackled with right now, what's in next month, and what's in next 3 months problem, right? Like a year long, like I don't put down on a list because obviously it's not on the horizon, but anything like a 3-month horizon problem is something that most people should do, I think. What is it that you can fix right now without anyone, so you're not waiting on anyone, and you can literally just go and fix right now. And to me, that's like a sense of relief. Like, I'm very sort of like task oriented, right? So like I make lists so that I can action them off. So if I can fix 5 things right now on my list that happens to be between now and next week, all of a sudden there's like a huge sense of comfort and relief, right? Like, and these things could even be like getting back to people via email. Like, I try and be very, very quick with emails, because like I think, not that they're waiting on it or etc., but it's just from task point of view, it's still a task for me to do. So I think sometimes when people launch businesses and startups, etc., these are very micro habits, like basically replying to people on time and things like that, that I think people underestimate, because what happens is you've got all these priorities in terms of planning a business, launching a product, whatever it may be. And if you don't have the discipline to sort of go through that in terms of like answering to people on time, etc., that also becomes a problem on your list, which is something that you could have just avoided. So to me personally, the way that I got through like all of those major challenges was just keeping up with those micro practices, right? Replying to people on time. Like, and to me, it's like within an hour. If I can fix it within an hour, I don't leave things to the next day. Basically making sure that, you know, at the end of the day when I go to bed, at whatever time it may be, I've answered with all the queries that can be tackled for the day. On to the next. It's very almost like military in some ways. And I think you need to have that discipline when you're launching a startup and when you're starting out with your own business, or even like in a higher place position, trying to become a leader, etc. These are all micro traits that you need to start exhibiting. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to go to the next stage. Because it's just a personal emotion management mechanism for me. Because I start feeling like anxiety when I'm not on top of things. And I think a lot of people do, but they won't admit it. That's where the anxiety is coming, right? And if you're constantly saying, I'm busy, well, are you really busy, or are you just not managing your time right? You know?
Yeah, true. I mean, I think I definitely echo what you say because a lot of people ask me, how did you kind of manage your startup whilst working, and then how you also kind of doing this podcast on the side, and a lot of the time it's just all about execution, and that's like
it doesn't have
80%
to
of
be
it.
perfect, right? It doesn't have to be perfect what you're executing. Sometimes like people put a lot of thought into a particular email, and let's say it's taken like an hour of their day. Did it really have to be that much? You know, like sometimes people kind of do themselves a disservice by going into too much detail for things, and sometimes detail is required, sure, but like if you can break it down into little modular steps to make your life easy and the person in front, rather than making them wait for 3 days and whatnot, like, you know, it just kind of streamlines things a little bit. So breaking it down to smaller bits, basically bite sizes.
Okay. I mean, would you say you're kind of a serial planner then, in terms of you plan all the details as much as you can, or is it kind of, you know what the overarching aim is, and you kind of everything else kind of works its way around to fit around that goal?
I think it's a bit of both. Like I don't overpoint to the point where I don't overplan, sorry, to the point where I don't execute. Like my whole thing is that I think you should never fail to execute, right? You should always hit the enter button. Like something should go out, right? In terms of your work, etc. You shouldn't just be like planning the entire time, because if you do plan the entire time, then you're just adding to your anxiety, right? Because you go back to your plan and see that nothing's been actioned. And essentially it's going to be like, oh, I've done so much work, but I can't see the results. So it's a combination of planning, yes, but execution is key.
Yeah. I mean, I also wanted to talk about the fact that you're a female founder, and a female founder of color as well. There definitely has been improvement in that kind of area over the last couple of years, but it's nowhere near as much as, you know, I'd like to see, and I'm sure others would like to see as well. As a female founder of color and as a leader of color, kind of what hurdles have you faced, and how do you kind of tackle those? How do you think about those?
There's quite a few questions in that, but
Yeah.
I mean, the way that I'd like to answer that, yes, firstly, the change is not nowhere near in terms of like bridging the gap for female founders to be able to do things that are, you know, significant, etc., and to be able to escalate projects and things. I think the way that you have to approach it is, first of all, stop thinking I'm a female founder, things are going to be different for me, etc. Like, if anything, you're going to probably have to work twice as hard to get noticed. The questions that you get asked by investors, etc., would most likely be different than the ones that your counterparts have to answer. And I think the core reasoning is just like it's human behavior, it's inbuilt, and it takes generations to sort of wash that. There are quite a few investors now that are obviously female focused and driven, etc., and that's changing the landscape by a large, and that's great. But I think the core idea has always kind of been that, you know, like female founders are kind of seen as a secondary leader. So you almost have to like, and that's why I think most females who launch their businesses and things, they kind of have that sort of thinking that I have to do twice as much work. And it's probably right, quite frankly, because there's not enough of us around, right? Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to do twice as much work to get noticed. You have to, you know, prove yourself again and again and keep on doing it. And even when failure happens at some point, you just have to brush it off and keep walking, because you know that at some point someone's not going to like it. But like, having that said, that's most entrepreneurs' journey, right? Like most entrepreneurs, whether male or female, have to be in that mindset. Whatever you do won't be enough. So it's a balancing act. Like, I think females should definitely not start thinking that, oh God, the world is so different just because I'm a female founder. but definitely be aware of the biases that certain groups still hold on to, and the fact that there's times where you might have to do double the work to what you would have envisaged just because you're talking to a particular set of people.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, obviously, I'm also from a colored background, and my parents were also immigrant parents as well. So that idea of always just having to work harder than your counterparts is just instilled in me at a very young age anyway. So it's kind of second nature, and it's probably quite similar for a lot of other people of color and immigrant backgrounds as well. I think it's interesting how you mentioned that you kind of brush aside that stigma to a certain extent and just kind of focus on the output and the goal. I think that's a really good way of looking at it as well. I wanted to kind of touch base on this idea of a Northern Star. So I think Tim Cook said recently in an interview that he did with GQ, he said a lot of people can work at 95%, but to get to 100%, so that last 5, it requires something greater than just the work you're doing, a greater story or a vision, which he alluded to as like the Northern Star. What do you think gets you to that 100%?
Honestly, like, I mean, it's I appreciate you sharing that theory, but it's just a lot of the times I think founders kind of get stuck in their head of what perfection looks like, right? And they sort of get consumed by the idea of, like, this is what is going to earn me a unicorn status or whatever. Like, this is how I become like 100%. I actually want to go against that and say that, there's no such thing as 100%. Like, basically, even if you launch something that's absolute perfection, how can you guarantee that your customers are going to be absolutely happy for eternity with it, right? I think perfection doesn't necessarily exist. So it's something that you have to keep at it. You have to keep on winning people. So also, like, it's not a race, it's a marathon when you launch these things, right? Like, and it's launch it, or even your career, etc. Like, you're going to meet people along the way who are going to challenge your beliefs, who are going to challenge your views, and you'll find yourself a different person every decade. That's something that I found, right? Like, I was a very different person a decade ago, and my values are completely different in terms of what success looks like compared to my values right now. And that's because I think I've challenged myself and I've evolved with time, right? And that's something like the idea of the Northern Star. I appreciate that, and the fact that, you want to reach that 100%, etc. I just really hope that for myself personally, it never happens, because that's going to help me to keep going. Because once you understand in your mind you've reached 100%, what else is there to do? Like...
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be my follow-up question. Yeah. Does a marathon ever end?
No, it should never end.
Okay.
I don't think it should ever end. Like, I mean, what happens then? Do you just die? I mean, like, I think careers should live on, and that's something that it's not from an archaic, like, or egoistic standpoint of, like, creating a legacy or anything. I just think that I personally would be very bored if something, like, was completed. Like, I'd probably be on to the next project, on to the next thing, right? Like, you'd create something else for yourself. And, like, I think it takes a certain sort of person to say that. A lot of people dream of retirement.
Yeah.
For instance, like, I don't think the generation these days does as much. I think they're very, very aware of the fact that, you can have a couple of careers, etc., and exit and then start off again. But, I mean, to be honest, the whole concept of retiring is a fad in itself. Because what exactly do you do after you get retired, right? Like, if you have an early retirement, that would be boring to a certain extent. I think there's a difference between retirement and financial freedom, right? So most people should probably aspire to be financially free, where they don't necessarily have to go to work, but they want to keep using their brain. Because it would be quite awful, right? If you just kind of retired or achieved that 100% and whatnot. Like, I don't think anything's ever that perfect, and, like, you need to keep on perfecting your craft, and that's a lifetime.
I think it's important, like you mentioned, the fact that kind of your idea of success changed every decade around that kind of time period. But that's probably kind of lends quite well into your argument, in the sense that, this decade you might be focused on certain things, but actually those goals and those targets, because you keep progressing as a person, they actually move forward as well with you. That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. I'm also not a fan of retirement. I don't like the idea of it. But again, that's usually because I'd always want to think that my mind would be useful for something, regardless of, if I'm 80 years old in a wheelchair or something. I still want to be doing something with my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I totally agree with what you just said. I wanted to, because a lot of people kind of, in the professional workplace, they might have a professional persona and a personal persona. The person they are at home versus the person they are at work. Do you feel like you still have that kind of split, or do you think it's quite, like, joint up now, or and if so, how have you kind of got it to that point?
I think I've done the opposite, quite personally. I think
Okay.
initially when I started off my career, personal and professional were combined to a large extent, just because I just didn't know that you need to have two. Quite frankly, like that's how open I was, and I mean, people consider myself quite open still, but like I think there's definitely like things that I don't share professionally that was quite shareable in my previous career. And like, for instance, like, you know, you just have a different sort of way of approaching people, and like you might be a little bit more friendlier than, like, you know, and then something basically leads to another whereby your professional and your personal is mixed. But, and I mean this in a way that where, you know, you've picked up friends and that's great that you've had friends for life, etc. But then like sometimes it can make things challenging to work with friends in business, for instance, right? When you've kind of like gone that far that they are a really close friend, and it's difficult to execute business tasks, etc., with them. So I think now I've come to the happy medium, that place where I can remain like that sort of cordialness with my work and professional life, but still keep a layer of personal that's very for a different sector of people in my life. So it's like, you know, there's a bit of a barrier between the two. And I think it is necessary, quite frankly, because like if you mix the two quite often, it just becomes hard to maintain. And then you're sort of like professional goals, you'll see them not being met at some point just because you're making those personal compromises, etc. So I think it's always healthy to keep a certain layer of like difference between the professional and the personal, but that doesn't mean that you have to be not a nice person professionally. You can still go out for coffees, right? You can still go out for drinks, etc. What I mean is like having your personal sort of barriers to what you consider a professional behavior versus a personal.
I mean, yeah, even at a very high level, I think.
Yeah.
If you just take that and put it into time management example, it's much easier to manage your time if you know
Exactly.
you have personal time and professional time.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's all kind of mixed and jumbled up, then
You
most
don't,
people
you don't
find
know
that
whether
they-
you're coming or going, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's what my personal way of like sort of dividing life is like, okay, this is personal time right now, and that's professional time. And I think that's healthy because most people kind of like launch into their own businesses, say, you know, this is a startup grind, I'm going to do this 24/7, etc. That's not sustainable. Firstly, it's not sustainable. You can keep on doing that, but then, you know, you might be creating something that's you know, potentially going to lead to burnout, etc. And like, you know, you just don't really have like a personal getaway that you can a place where you think you've got 5 people that you trust in your personal circle, and you can say whatever you want, be yourself with them. That person doesn't necessarily need to be the same in the professional sphere. So I think they need to be 2 different people at times.
Okay, I'm going to time travel back a couple of years, because I guess when those kind of those barriers were very blurred was during COVID, when everyone was working from home, and even now when you have this hybrid working model. Did you find that it was difficult to kind of have those barriers back then, or do you think it was actually easier to implement those whilst you're working from home and have that kind of hybrid model?
I think that's when I developed it, to be honest, being able to separate the two, because when you don't have those kind of restrictions, it's easier to sort of like go out and meet people, etc. And like, especially at the stage that I had come to this country, etc. And it was very new to me. I was trying to build my ecosystem. I could have easily developed a dependency on, like, you know, certain people that are better off in the professional space and not in the personal, for instance, right? Like those two could have been mixed up. I think COVID kind of helped with what it was doing, because, you know, there was only 5 people, very few people that I kind of like, you know, one at a time could have met. So it made me prioritize and pick and choose who I want to invite into my personal circle and who is more of like a professional and over Zoom call chat. You know, like it kind of helped in terms of like distinguishing, if I really had to pick in this restrictive time, who do I choose to go for a walk in the park with? You know, because the government basically made you choose, but it helped in terms of formulating my own thesis of who my top 5 people are, right? That I kind of like want to spend time with personally, and also like the people that I care about and trust professionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I limit my close friend groups to around 5 to 10. I think if it ever gets to a point where I can't count them on my hand, then I probably have too many people to keep in touch with.
Slippery slope.
So for me, it's like the rule of 10. 10 is the maximum for me, and they know who they are. So I wanted to touch on inspiration a little bit, and from a couple of angles. The first angle would probably be in the teams that you've worked in as a leader, or maybe even as a team member. How do you keep people inspired as maybe kind of as a leader in the team, or maybe just as a team member trying to keep someone going? How do you kind of keep that inspiration level high?
I guess as a leader, you lead by example, right? So it's your own sort of routines and your own sort of habits, etc., of the way that you see the world that people will kind of like believe and catch on, etc. So it's basically your personal thesis of how you conduct yourself and like etc. I personally like networking, for instance, right? So no matter what time of the day, etc., like, you know, I'll try and make sure that if I've connected with someone, I really want to have a chat, either via video call or like meet them for a coffee or something, know more about them. I think it puts a personal touch into things, and like it really speaks. That's my brand, right? I don't necessarily just like accept people on LinkedIn, and like, for instance, that's one of the things, right? Like I don't accept just anyone on LinkedIn, and I kind of want to like get to know that person a bit more, even if it's like a 5-minute conversation, etc. Also with like thought leadership, things that I believe in and care about, like diversity in venture capital, diversity in startup land, things like that. So I think it is with those micro actions that you kind of inspire other people around you. It's not something that you can kind of indoctrinate into people and speak to them. Like, right, this is what I think my definition of leadership is. It's very much leading by example. Right, I do X, Y, and Z. You can have your own take on leadership in terms of like what you think is right, but this is what works for me. So I kind of just own that. And for me personally, it's connecting with people and having a few beliefs that I care about and potentially write about thought leadership wise.
I think that's interesting, because when we've asked people that question in the past, there's kind of, I find you can put answers into broadly 2 buckets, either leading by example or leading by motivation or like storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting the perspective that you come from, that leading by example point, because
I'm not a very good storyteller. My stories are all over the place, so it's not very easy for me to tell a story. That's why I have to lead by example.
yeah, but I find that a lot of kind of startup founders, they do lead by example, because a lot of them are either, you know, very technically gifted,
Yeah.
but not necessarily people side gifted. So that's interesting. I'm sure that probably resonates with a lot of people that'll listen to the podcast as well. The other kind of angle I wanted to attack inspiration from was, I wanted to ask you if you've ever felt like you've lacked inspiration at any point during your life, and kind of during that period, how did you kind of navigate that?
All the time. I think it comes and goes, right? Like it's not like like it's not a paying tenant in your mind that like inspiration is always going to be there, right? It comes and it goes. And I think the way that I have approached that in times where I do like inspiration, I go back to sort of my roots in terms of ask myself the question of why I'm trying to do this in the first place, right? So just a basic question: why am I motivated or excited about a particular opportunity, about working with certain people? Why is this happening? I think it's very human to lose inspiration every now and then. No one can be inspired 24/7, right? During your normal day, there's so many emotions and thoughts, etc. There's more negative emotion than positive, right? A lot of it is basically fighting back, and that's what inspiration is for me. I ask that question of why I'm doing things, and if the answer is still positive, then I'm inspired about it. If it's not, then on to the next. Because I think you need to be able to transition from one to the next, right? I think most of the time people take inspiration for granted as well, that this is a way that I should feel, and they don't allow themselves to be vulnerable. That's quite harsh as well. I think most founders, I've seen myself do it at one point in time, where it's like, why am I not motivated? Why am I not inspired by this? I should be doing this right now. But I don't think that that's necessarily going to expedite anything, right? Like, so I came to that conclusion a very long time ago. If there's a certain way that you feel about something, if it's lacking inspiration, etc., ask the deeper question of why you're doing this and where is it going to take you, and is that why you're not feeling inspired? Because the end goal is potentially different, or the target has moved from what you initially thought it was going to be, right? It's always a case of going and being quite self-aware of how you're feeling at that point in time. You have to check in with yourself.
Is that something that you've realized quite recently, or is that something that you kind of held true with yourself for quite a long time now?
I think I've always done that, to be honest. Ever since, like, I started maybe realizing that I am a very self-aware person, maybe more in the working years, like after university when I started working, etc. I'd always ask myself the question of, am I feeling inspired to do this right now? Is it something that still speaks to me? If not, okay, what's the horizon on it? Like, to get a bit more technical in terms of what my outcomes are, what my goals were from this thing, this opportunity. And if it's not something that holds true still, well, you got to do something to fix it. Go and find that fire again, right? You're not going to be, it's not something that's supposed to be burning 24/7. And I mean, that's a very normal human thing, right? Like, you're allowed to not feel inspired by something that once was exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting observation. Like, even in my kind of, if I look back at the last 5 years for myself, I find one thing super exciting, and then the next year it might not be as exciting, so I move on very quickly. And that's kind of, that can be a strength and a weakness, but it's important, like you said, just to be able to recognize that in the first instance.
I guess it's only a weakness when you're just going from one opportunity to the other for a high, right? If you're trying to just satisfy an itch, then that's a bit of a weakness. But it's a true strength if you're able to be self-aware and question what legitimately was exciting you and whether you've achieved all of those things.
Yeah.
Then it's a different scenario altogether. It's like, oh, okay, your goal was to do X, Y, and Z. You've achieved X, Y, and Z, and that's why you're feeling a bit dull. But it doesn't mean you failed. It just means you've achieved it. What's the next challenge? So it's a bit different in that respect. It's not that, oh, I wanted to achieve X, Y, and Z. I can't achieve X, Y, and Z, but I still just want to move on to like A, B, and C or something like that. It's just those are two different problems if I'm trying to explain it properly.
Yeah, no,
right?
I get it. Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
sense. So yeah, that's interesting. I think so. This podcast, Leadership Unplugged, is about leadership. So I wanted to ask a question as to, is there one leader in your journey so far which comes to mind, which you kind of think, oh, that person changed kind of the course of my life, kind of thing, and what made them such a great leader and someone that you would listen to and take advice from?
Honestly, there's not a single one person that I draw inspiration from. I don't like giving that much power to anyone because I think that human beings by nature are flawed, me including. Yeah, right. I'm definitely very flawed. And I don't think we have to, like, in terms of leadership, I'd like to kind of say I've got many mentors and I take inspiration from each and every one of them. I have high regard for each and every one of them. I've learned a ton from all of them. Right, learn from their careers, their advice for my career. I've learned a lot on the process on the way, but I'm never ever going to take a single name just because of the reason that I don't think anyone kind of should be put on that pedestal where they kind of have shifted the course of your career. And for me personally, it hasn't been the case. Like, I've had to talk to multiple people, some bad advice, some good advice, and sort of navigate my way through. Right, so in the end, it's really your own sort of observations, reflections, and being self-aware that makes you the leader that you are. It's not necessarily like one person who can like dictate the course of your life and like say those magic words that make you think, oh, this is what my destiny is. I don't believe in any of that. So it's very tough for me to take one name, but I have been very, very grateful to benefit from multiple mentors and whatnot. And I still am. I keep in touch with people.
You kind of take kind of bits and bobs from everyone.
Definitely.
In a certain sense, as an individual, you are a culmination of kind of a lot of influences from different directions.
Yeah, and I mean, like, to be honest, like, I'd rather have it that way because no two people's career is going to be the same, right? So you're obviously, like, you might have, like, grains of it where, like, you did a similar thing compared to that person in that journey and you want to go to the next level, so you're drawing inspiration. But you're not going to follow in their footsteps exactly. You're not a clone. So you have to kind of craft your own, right? And that's where I kind of, like, take what I can and say, right, this is what worked for them. It might work for me about 85%. It doesn't have to be 100. I can make my own 25 and, like, sort of understand where it's going to take me, if this is going to work for me. The bottom line being, it should work for you, right?
Yeah.
It should work for you. Like, no one person's career path is going to be cloned and working for you and them at the same time. It's not a thing.
I mean, that's quite interesting because I think, especially when maybe you've graduated university and you're kind of in that graduate role, it's very easy to compare yourself to others.
Yeah.
But actually, that just made me realize that you're right. Everyone does have a unique journey and a unique kind of career path, no matter where that career path ends up. So actually, comparison is kind of a foolish game to a certain extent.
Oh, definitely.
But
I mean, you can use it as a benchmark.
Yeah.
Comparing is different to benchmarking, right? Like, you can definitely I've used other people's careers as a benchmark to understand where I'm sitting right now. But I think when you're comparing it, then you're attaching emotion to it. So divorce the emotion from it and just understand from a benchmarking perspective, somebody's done X, Y, and Z to get to a certain place. And yeah, to a large extent, that can be used as a roadmap, but it's not a full conclusive one. Like it's something that, you can embark on, but then make your own little detours on the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure every leader we've spoken to on the podcast so far, they have mentioned the importance of mentors,
Yeah.
and that seems to be quite conclusive across everyone that I've spoken to. How did you find your mentors? Did it happen naturally, or were you actively looking for people, or how did it all come about?
I mean, I'm still looking. So I think I'd never stop looking for mentors. I think everyone needs to have, even after they've achieved some level of leadership capabilities, they're always going to need mentors because you need to learn from people, right? So that's something that I've actively engaged in always and still have. So I go and find people that inspire me in certain respects and then very kindly ask for their time, and they generously sometimes give me their time. That's how it's been working out.
Perfect. I'm going to move on a little bit to what you're doing now because I think it's important to talk about it and it's really great work. Astra, can you tell us a little bit more about what Astra is and why it's so important to you?
Sure, with pleasure. So, Astra is basically an angel investor network that I launched a couple of months ago, and we've had amazing traction in terms of getting people on board. Essentially, the problem that we're trying to solve is getting more underrepresented people into angel investing and investing in underrepresented founders. So it's basically a two birds, one stone approach that I hope works in the future, because I think there's huge demand from a lot of underrepresented people who don't necessarily know about angel investing to invest their funds in a separate asset class that they didn't know that was available, right? So, I mean, angel investing has always had the reputation of, somebody who's retired, is high net worth, and is able to sort of draw funds, a huge amount of money, and be able to support startups. So we're trying to change that and basically educate people that, it doesn't have to be big pools of funds. It can be small checks for you to start thinking about how an investor would try and cultivate your own investment thesis, understand that different types of technology have different problems and challenges and wins and losses, etc. So try and cultivate your own thought process in terms of why someone wants to invest in a B2B startup, for instance, or AI startup, etc. So there's different pain points over there that we're trying to solve. But essentially, it's an investor network where angel investors and founders are getting connected.
And I think we spoke about it earlier about D&I, just diversity and inclusion, kind of being a generational mindset shift.
Yeah.
Kind of as a leader in that space, what things can the ecosystem be doing now to help cultivate that mindset shift, like down the line?
I think, yeah, I mean, like, for instance, we've always been thinking about how to get underrepresented businesses funded, right? So it's still coming from the same sort of source of capital, for instance. It's still coming from people who aren't necessarily the same as underrepresented as the ones who are getting funding. So, for instance, I think more of these kind of initiatives should happen, like Astra, where the funders themselves are from an underrepresented background. They understand the pain points. They understand why certain startups don't necessarily get top tier funding and why they need to be, sort of supported in the early stages to be able to get top tier funding. So I think it's sort of like more networks such as Astra that need to be around, that where people can meet and genuinely understand that there's tools and systems in place now that you can generally start moving the dial and supporting companies that are on their journey and definitely need your help.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when people talk about societal change, I find that a lot of it starts with education.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you would be, as a lot of the target audience, a lot of the people that will be listening to this will be quite early on in their careers, are quite young. What can we do to kind of, especially the minority ethnic groups, do to educate ourselves about angel investing so that when we do have the means to kind of get more involved, we're ready and we know what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very active sort of aim, right? Like if you want to get educated in something, you have to kind of align yourself with synergies that help your knowledge. So for instance, like not just read about it online, but also like make an active attempt to go to these founder meetups and join communities like such as Astra. Humble promotion. Join communities like Astra, whereabouts you can come and meet more people and try and start formulating your own thesis, because it does genuinely take a lifetime to come up with like the right sort of angel investment thesis and be able to make success out of those investments. It's not just about, investing in your friends and families, startups and businesses, etc. That's investing out of emotion. So if somebody is like serious about making this a side hustle career or a separate asset class that they would invest in, like they would put money in S&P or such because maybe they can't afford a house, for instance, right? But they can definitely do a small check in a startup. They need to start making a commitment towards learning that. And I think it can be learned, but it can't be taught.
Yeah.
It's something that you have to keep an active mind on and basically study economic trends, understand which startups are doing better, go and join groups that are talking about it all the time, try and speak with founders and understand their challenges, what could potentially be help to them in terms of value add from your end as an angel to expedite the process. There's a lot that can be done over there, but these are just a few things that I'm saying. But I think most importantly, somebody who's thinking about angel investment needs to have a mindset that constantly, is to feed your hunger for knowledge in terms of like what companies are doing well, what do I want to be known as an angel investor, what sort of a person do I see as a founder that I can work with, all of those things.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I think we're definitely going to try and do something with the podcast generally to cultivate a community, which is still being brainstormed kind of as we speak. I'm going to kind of wrap this up with a couple questions. One which is looking backwards and one which is looking forwards. I'll start off with the backward one, which would be, if you were to teleport back in time and speak to yourself just as you're starting university, what kind of advice would you give yourself back then which you think would be relevant to where you are now?
Just calm down. It'll be all right. Calm down. You're going to make mistakes. You'll learn along the way. No one ever didn't make mistakes. You're only human. Yeah, and it'll work out. I promise you.
Would that say you're quite risk adverse then back then? Or
I would say that I was just very anxious about everything. Like, yeah, and I was always in a hurry. I still am. But I think now I've understood how to sort of like make a solid sort of plan around things. I'm more patient with things being realized. Back then, I think I'm more impatient than what I am right now. I was more impatient back then in terms of getting a result out of something. And that potentially would like take you in the other direction sometimes where, you just got so much to prove and so much to do, and like, you just want to get out there and do stuff. So, and also, like, to be fair, like the ecosystems that I was in earlier on in life was probably not enabling it. So it's something that I needed to probably come to the startup world to like make things happen and to be able to get genuine opportunities to work with people who are like-minded and things like that. So timing is a huge thing, but you can't help it, because at that time you're filled with enthusiasm and you're young, and I still am filled with enthusiasm, a bit older, but definitely, I mean, I think I've learned how to sort of hone my expectations, be more patient, and something that I probably didn't have back then, didn't have enough patience. So I think I've like definitely matured along the process and learned how to wait for a result and when to stop waiting and when to move on, etc. Like just being more self-aware of how I come across, as opposed to back then probably just, a whole lot to prove and like a whole lot to achieve in just that one moment. And I mean, people underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years and like overestimate what they can do in a year, right? There's a saying, and it holds true. Definitely. I learned that. And now I think I'm a bit more like calm about the process.
I think patience is a super underrated skill.
Yeah.
Especially in a world which is designed with kind of short attention spans and instant gratification. Patience is very much overlooked a lot of the time, and kind of just sticking with your thesis and kind of working on it, adapting it based on feedback that you get. But patience kind of lends itself quite well with self-confidence if you manage to kind of marry them up quite well. That's what I found so far. And the last question, which is more forward-looking, which would be, when all is said and done, what would you like to be remembered for?
She tried. That's all. That's literally it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't believe in like setting a huge legacy statement, etc. I just want to be remembered to be someone who tried like their hardest at everything that they did. Like, don't want to quantify it. I don't want to put like a medal on it, a badge of honor or anything as such. I just want to be known as someone who tried and gave it their absolute best at whatever they touched.
Well, I don't really know how to end it any better than that. So thank you very much, Anishka, for your time and coming to sit down with us. And it's been amazing conversation for the last hour. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hasan.